even though I'm the only one in the room. We're talking about conformity. When we're dealing with conformity, why is it like that? There we go. Anyway, when we're dealing with conformity, some things are good and some things are bad. A good aspect of conformity would be the fact that we drive on the correct side of the road. We stop at stop signs. That type of conformity is good. We try not to be violent. That is a social norm. Violence is rarely acceptable behavior. What else? We wear our underwear on the inside of our clothes instead of the outside of our clothes, hence the name underwear. And everything else is outerwear. So that's good as far as conformity is concerned, but sometimes conformity can be bad. There are some negative things about it. Wait a minute, that thing is tilted, isn't it? Worse. Oh, there it goes. It's not always a positive thing. Okay, fine. It's not always a positive thing. Suggestibility is not always harmless, and we see this from time to time. It's not uncommon for people to get ideas from what other people do, copycat murders, hijackings. Back in the 60s and 70s, we saw a lot of hijackings. People would get the idea that they could do that. UFO sightings have to do with suggestibility. Even suicides tend to occur in waves. I was working in Omaha when they had a spat of suicides at a Catholic high school. It was really kind of odd. Since it's a Catholic high school, suicide is against the religious norms of Catholicism. If you commit suicide, you can't be buried in hallowed ground. In other words, you have to find another cemetery where they will bury you. You can't be buried in a Catholic cemetery. So it's relatively odd for it's not that common for people who are Catholic to commit suicide. But they had 7 suicides in this one high school within about 3 weeks of each other, a little over 2 weeks of each other. 7 suicides and 15 attempts. It was really kind of weird. The first 2 people that committed suicide, one was the captain of the football team and the other was the head cheerleader, but they didn't even know each other because she was the head cheerleader for wrestling and basketball. He was a football player. She was a senior and he was a junior, I think. They didn't have any classes together, but he committed suicide, then she committed suicide. Then they had a bunch of other suicides that occurred. When Marilyn Monroe committed suicide in 1963, the suicide rate in the United States went up 12%. It just shot up by 12%. As weird as that may sound. Mass delusions are not imaginary. However, the circumstances usually involve people responding to otherwise overlooked symptoms. The individuals that committed suicide were individuals that were depressed, and that's why they did it. Or that's one of the reasons that they did it. It was really kind of a weird situation because they called in specialists from New York City. Well, this is Omaha, Nebraska, the corn capital of the United States. These were mostly Jewish psychologists from New York City. And for one thing, they didn't understand each other. They didn't understand the New York accent. The people from New York talk way too fast for the kids in Omaha. Eventually, and it didn't take them very long, there was a rebellion where the parents tried to get rid of these guys. And it was the bringing together of the community to get rid of the psychologists from New York City that actually cured the suicide. The cluster of suicides that they had. As weird as that sounds. Anyway. But when we're dealing with Marilyn Monroe, of course, that didn't go away. not right away anyway. So the two names that you need to remember when we're talking about conformity, one of the names is Shafir. He's the one that did the first research. And the other one is Solomon Asch, A-S-C-H. In the 1950s, he looked at why individuals were conforming. This was a really serious question that people had, especially after World War II, when we saw the Japanese Banzai and kamikaze attacks. We saw the Nazis with their death camps. And then during the Korean War, of course, we saw the McCarthy era in the United States, where McCarthy was claiming that all these people were communists, and he wanted people to state their fealty to the United States. He forced people to do that. He called them into Congress, and he made them declare that they were loyal Americans and were not communists. So he's forcing them to talk. They didn't accept the Fifth Amendment at that point. So there's a lot going on in the United States right after World War II, at the beginning of the 1950s. So Asch wanted to find out about conformity. Asch was looking at conformity. He conducted experiments where all the participants but one were Confederates. So they were trying to find out if they could make that person conform to everybody else. Everybody in the room says one thing. They knew the one guy knew it was wrong. Did they conform or did they not conform? It was obvious that everybody else was getting it wrong. So did he conform is the question, or she, whichever the case may be. After a series of obvious group agreements, the group purposely all selected obviously incorrect answers. 37% of the time the subject went along with the group. So that's how strong conformity is. So if everybody in the class were wearing black clothes, oh my goodness, everybody in the class is wearing black clothes. And here I am in blue. Oh my God, what's wrong with me? Oh, would I conform? Wait until tomorrow. Tomorrow I'm wearing blue again tomorrow. But I got a red shirt tomorrow. Okay, anyway. People in church. Do you ever hear somebody stand up and say, you know, preacher, you got it wrong today. I mean, everything you're saying is almost okay, but when you talk about, you know, whatever. Do we argue with preachers? I do. Not in church, because I don't go to church, but that's one of my problems is I don't go to church, I guess. Stanley Milgram wanted to know how far people would follow an authority figure. The idea was, and this is right after World War II, of course, they had the Nuremberg trials, they had all the Nazis. They were trying to figure out who in Germany were Nazis and who weren't Nazis. We were bringing some of those guys back to the United States because they were scientists and we needed their information. And so that's what we did. We brought them back to the United States. Now the question was, are these guys going to start a Nazi, a fascist movement in the United States? I mean, that's a possibility. How far do you follow somebody in authority? I mean, they just fought World War II. Most of these, including Milgram himself, was in the military. He had to follow orders. You didn't question orders, especially in a combat situation. So how conforming are we? That was the question. Now the idea was, oh my goodness gracious. So of course they had all these Nazi death camps where they took all the Jews and they killed as many of them as they possibly could. They also were killing other individuals. They were killing communists. They were killing gypsies. They killed evangelical Christians. They were trying to kill as many undesirables as possible. One of the interesting things about Germany before World War II was they had a lot of individuals with really interesting disabilities. If you've ever seen the movie Freaks, which was made in the 1930s, most of the individuals in that movie are from Germany. Germany had a genetic proclivity for dwarfism. So there were a lot of dwarves in Germany. Well, what happened to all those guys? They killed them all. Anybody that wasn't pure, wasn't perfect, they just killed them. People that had an intellectual disability, they killed them. Trying to do away with that genetic aspect. Eugenics, and of course if you've ever been in Marius's class, he talks about eugenics. Eugenics was very popular in the United States. There were people in the United States that wanted to do away with the people that weren't perfect. They wanted to, if somebody had a high IQ, they wanted that person to reproduce as much as possible. The eugenics movement. It was worse in Germany, of course. During World War II, they actually had breeding farms where German blonde-haired, blue-eyed German soldiers would go and reproduce, or they would have sex with as many young ladies as possible, as long as she was blonde-headed and blue-eyed as well. They were trying to produce a master race. They weren't successful, of course. Well, they weren't successful at all. But, I mean, we had all this conformity taking place all around the world. The Japanese did exactly the same things. The Spartans did the same thing way back in ancient Greece. If somebody wasn't perfect, they just left them out to die. It was a form of eugenics, and of course that was part of the argument of the eugenics movement. Well, look at the Spartans, look how powerful the Spartans were. 300 Spartans, I think it was 300, wasn't it? Yeah, it's 300. Yeah, that's the movie. It's a crazy movie where they face off all the Persians, which isn't actually accurate, by the way. Sure, there were 300 Spartans, but there were also a couple thousand other Greeks there who weren't Spartan. Anyway, okay, so here Milgram decided he was going to do his experiment. This is something that you certainly couldn't do today. It was fairly unethical for them to do what they did. The experiment was really kind of interesting. They brought a person in, and they brought them in with a Confederate. The Confederate, of course, was always the person that was going to be tested, and the other individual was the one that was the tester. The subject, the actual subject was the tester. And the other person was the testee. He was the person he was testing against, or he was the one that they were testing. He took them in and they told them it was an educational experiment. They were going to use pain. They were going to use electric shocks to teach people. And it turned out that the guy wasn't getting hardly anything right, so the guy had to continue shocking him. In the beginning they shocked him a little bit, then they shocked him more and more and more and more and more, until they shocked him enough to kill him. That was the idea. This is what wait a minute, where's the instrument? There it is right there. As you can see, you got lots of toggle switches in order to shock somebody. That was the idea. And they had him help strap him down to the chair so that he would be shocked. This is the guy at the big panel, and there's the authority figures right here. And this is the guy they're actually testing. This guy was a Confederate. Of course, as you can see, he's an older gentleman. In the end, he was screaming that he was having heart problems. He was beating on the wall. And the question is, how many people would actually shock him all the way up to killing somebody? There's a big red X on it right here at the end. So how many people would do that was the question, and the answer is 65%. 2/3 of the people that they tested did it. In the beginning, they only tested men, but then they tested women. And women, of course, are sugar and spice and everything nice, aren't they? I think I read that in the book. Women are nicer than men, aren't they?
Sure.
Yeah, of course they are. So what was their percentage?
Same.
Same, exactly 65%. They follow orders just like everybody else does, as interesting as that is. And there we go, the infamous Milgram experiment. Milgram discovered that there were 4 factors to obedience: the victim's emotional distance, This is somebody that they didn't know, of course, and it's easy to shock somebody you don't know, somebody that you don't have any emotional tie to. The authority's closeness and legitimacy. If the authority figure was in the room, then the individual is more likely to shock the person. Whether or not the authority was institutionalized, in this case, it was Yale University that was doing the experiment. Nobody wanted to screw anything up at Yale. The liberating effects of a disobedient fellow subject. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. Emotional distance of the victim. Milgram's subjects acted with the least compassion when the shock victims could not be seen. And of course, well, do I have a picture of it? Wait a minute, somewhere. Yeah, there it is. Yeah, this is what it looked like. So here's the authority figure, here's the guy doing the shocking, and the other guy's behind a door. He's in another room. So it was easy to shock that guy, as long as you couldn't hear what he had to say. When there was no protest from the shock victim, compliance was almost 100%. So as long as he wasn't saying anything or complaining or going, ow! They just shocked him right up to the end. When the shock victims were in the same room as the subject, compliance went down to 40%. So as long as he was in the other room, it was 65%. If he was in the same room as you, it was still 40%. That's 4 out of every 10 people are willing to shock somebody when they can see him. 4 out of 10, 2 out of 5. That's about as much as we could reduce that, isn't it? When the subject had to force the shock victim's hand on the shock plate, the compliance went down to 30%. 1 out of every 3 people were willing to hold that guy's hand down to the shock plate. 1 out of every 3. That's cold. Combat has proven that Milgram is correct in his assumptions. The more distant or depersonalized the enemy, the easier it is to kill them. And so we give them names, we dehumanize them. We have always done this with the enemy. During the Civil War, the Confederates, the rebels, referred to the Union soldiers as blue bellies. It's easy to shoot a blue belly, I would imagine. The Union forces called the Confederates secessionists, or other obscene terms. But we've always done this. During World War I, we referred to the Germans as Krauts. Sauerkraut, get it? Krauts. Or Heinies. Makes them sound like they're the rear end of a horse. Heinies. World War II, we referred to we didn't really attack the Germans as much as we didn't like the Japanese because they bombed Pearl Harbor. We referred to them as Japs. We referred to them as gooks during Vietnam and Korean War. We referred to the enemy, who were all Asian, they were either North Korean or Chinese, as gooks or slopes. During Vietnam, we referred to the Vietnamese as zipper heads because a lot of them had scars on their heads and they shaved their heads. And you could see it looked like they had zipper heads. It's a really stupid name. Now, we're fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq. We refer to those guys as ragheads, camel jockeys, and hajis. Hajis is probably the most common. When I was, where were we? Oh, I was stationed in, where was I? Oh, Lubbock, Texas. We were training Saudi Arabian pilots. As a matter of fact, one of the Saudi Arabian pilots was the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. I'm sorry, Iran. We are actually training both groups, but the Crown Prince of Iran was one of the individuals we were dealing with, and the pilots that were training them called them ragheads or camel jockeys, which seemed a little odd since they were flying jet airplanes, but that's neither here nor there. Trying to distance themselves from these individuals. One of the huge complaints about the Iranians and the Saudi Arabians was the fact they didn't bathe. So they had body odor. They didn't quite like. The other thing was that, of course, because they're from the desert and they grew up in that environment, these individuals didn't sweat very much. So they had a very distinctive odor. It was quite different from, you know, the Americans are just water, you know, perspiration's pouring off of these guys, and here these Arab guys are not sweating at all. At the same time, researchers have found that it is more difficult to abort a pregnancy when the mother has seen an ultrasound of her fetus. Some states have ordered that the woman can't have an abortion until they do an ultrasound and she looks at the picture. They have declared that unconstitutional, so they can't do that.
Isn't that like the same thing when they give birth and they're planning on, for adoption? They just take the baby into the other room. They don't even let the mother hold him. Because most of the time when the mother holds the baby, they change their minds and they say they don't want to give him up for adoption anymore. So isn't that like?
I don't know. We never did that. Of course, I was working in a Catholic hospital. So maybe that was different. Wasn't it? Yeah. St. Joseph and what else was it? Children's Hospital was a Methodist hospital. So that was a little bit different. No, we always let the mother hold the baby. I don't know. We always did. Happened. I don't know. Maybe that's the way it is in Arizona or New Mexico. Maybe in the Southwest, that's the way people play the game. I don't know. And everything changes. I haven't really been in medicine since the 90s, since the 1990s. Closeness and legitimacy of the authority. Milgram discovered that when the authority figure stayed in the room with the subject, obedience was high. I mean, if the officer's right there telling you what to do, it's really hard to say no. When the authority figure was not in the room, the compliance dropped to 21%. When the authority figure was perceived as illegitimate, compliance dropped by 80%, which is kind of exciting. Thank you. When doctors order, nurses obey. I worked in medicine for 30 years, and I can tell you that doctors think they know everything. Sometimes they do, and sometimes, rarely do they actually know everything. A lot of times they make mistakes. And so if you see a doctor make a mistake, my responsibility always was to tell them. They don't like being told that they're wrong. A lot of times it starts an argument, sometimes they just order you. I mean, if they've made a mistake, you don't want to kill the patient. Well, I never wanted to kill the patient. Maybe the nurses don't care. An experiment that mirrored Milgram's Hoffling had 22 nurses given an order that they knew couldn't possibly be right. They were supposed to give this individual an overdose of a narcotic. It was like 10 times as much. It would be killing horses is the way you look at it. Instead of a gram, it was milligram, it was milligrams. Yes, sir.
Do nurses have a responsibility to say something to doctors if they think there's something that's...
Only if they've got the intestinal fortitude to do that. Most nurses don't. They've been trained to do whatever the doctor tells them to do. They're told that the doctor is always correct. So they rarely, I've been in these situations, it's always somebody else. It's always, and everybody's looking to everybody else to say something. But I always was the first one to talk, so I got into trouble a lot because, I don't care. The other thing was I was in the military, so I had been in the military, and I knew that my wife was going to get orders in like 2 weeks or something, that kind of thing. So I moved around a lot, and because of that, it didn't bother me to tell people. But there are people that, nurses are supposed to, but they don't always. They don't always think that they're right. They question themselves, let alone they don't question the doctor, they question themselves. So this is a really serious problem. So when they did that, when they ordered these 22 nurses to overdose the patient, 21 of them did out of 22. Whoops.
I want that 22nd.
Yeah, I want the 22nd nurse too. That was probably my mom. The experiment was repeated 2 more times with similar results, and that's kind of shocking, and maybe one of the reasons why they have so much trouble in medicine. The other problem is if they actually did overdose patients, certainly they didn't kill them. These 21 people died. because of this experiment. But I can't remember what I was going to say. Yeah, they didn't let him overdose the patient. Anyway. Institutional authority, because Milgram did his experiment at Yale University. Many of his subjects claimed that it was the prestige of the institution that made them comply to such a heinous command. Milgram repeated his experiment as an unknown research group in Connecticut. Fewer people complied with the authority, but still 48% did. This is half of the people, okay, are still doing it. They don't care. It doesn't have Yale on top of it. It's some bizarre research group in Connecticut, but they still did it. Liberating effect of group defiance. Milgram discovered that when the subjects observed others disobeying the authority figure, they were likely to do the same. A full 90% followed the lead of their rebellious colleagues, proving that the group influence can be liberating. It takes two. You and somebody else. If somebody else has already done it, it's easy to join his group. That's the way it works. And that usually is what happened. I didn't mind telling the doctor he was wrong because I knew everybody else was thinking it, and if I said it, they would follow me. So everybody looked to me to complain to the doctor. Hoping that we were all on the same page, of course. From time to time, I was the only one that complained. And I said, I don't think that's going to work. I think you're doing something wrong. And, well, anyway. Researchers discovered fairly quickly that people tended to conform when they felt incompetent. Group attributes that matter. Conformity is highest when a group has 3 or more people. When there is a group cohesiveness, when the group is unanimous, when the group is high in status, when the response is not public, when the group has made no prior commitment. It's a lot easier for people to agree to that. According to Ash and other researchers, the most conformity that can be generated by a group is when the group is made up of 3, 4, or 5 members. I think I've told you this story. Once upon a time, we had a little girl that had diarrhea so bad that we couldn't stop it, and the doctors were putting IV after IV after IV into her arms. Of course, when you're dehydrated, she had diarrhea. When you have diarrhea that bad, you become dehydrated. When you become dehydrated, it's really hard to, and she had small veins, and it's really hard to maintain IVs because the veins shrink. And this was what was going on with this little girl. She's only 12 years old, and she's squirting herself to death. And we checked, we looked, we tried to find anything that was wrong with this kid. We looked at her stool, we looked at the bacteria, we tried to grow, we thought it was salmonellosis, shigellosis, we were looking for an amoeba, we were looking for anything. We couldn't find anything in there. And of course the doctor's getting more and more frustrated. The kid's almost dead, literally, she's almost dead. She's only a couple hours away from death. I was working in some other section, but I came into micro to look at this kid's stool specimen because I was in charge of the lab. So I came in and looked at her stool specimen. I had actually looked at it before when we were looking for amoeba, and we didn't find any. There was nothing in there, nothing we could do. And her stool was almost liquid. I mean, it was almost. It's almost water. I mean, it didn't have any viscosity to it at all. So I looked at it this last time, and I saw what I thought were white cells, and I said, maybe that's something else. And so I put it in a germ tube. I was looking for a fungus. I was looking for anything that we hadn't looked for before. And lo and behold, that's what it was. It's Candida albicans. And of course, Candida albicans doesn't cause diarrhea. I know, this is weird, but it's all over the place. I mean, I grew it in the germ tube, and I told the doctor. And of course, the doctor got mad at first. He said, did I order one of those? You did a test that I didn't tell you to do. And then I told him, look, it's got Candida in it. Is this a possibility? And he looked in his literature, and there was nothing in there about candida causing diarrhea. And but I said, you know, I didn't see any bacteria in there. We haven't been growing anything on the plates. Could it be? Could this be the problem? And he admitted that possibly, if there was nothing else in there, that the candida was causing a problem. So he treated her with flagyl, which is an antifungal, and lo and behold, she got better. Candida albicans.
What is that?
That's the stuff that causes thrush. You
Oh,
get it under your
okay.
toenails. Okay. Yeah. That's the stuff that causes yeast infections in women. Very common. It's relatively common. Anyway.
What did he treat it with?
Flagyl. It's an antifungal medication. Yeast is wet fungus is what it is. That's what yeast is. And she had Candida albicans. Now the reason that it caused such a problem was because they had just treated her for a urinary tract infection, and they killed off all of the normal flora in her gut, in her intestinal tract. And since there was no bacteria to limit the amount of candida, the candida just exploded and went nuts and caused all these colonic spasms in her body, and she was just squirting herself to death.
Oh,
I know, it's crazy. And of course the doctor wrote it up, and yeah, they gave him another stripe. Not a stripe. He was a major, and they made him a lieutenant colonel because he saved this little girl's life.
you know what they use, Napa's used to treat that? Is, juniper berries.
Okay, does it work?
Yeah,
Okay. It's antifungal?
yeah, I've seen people use it for, mostly for thrush, but also
Oh,
for
sure.
urinary tract infection.
Yeah.
They boil it,
Oh, okay.
and they drink it for the extra.
Well, we were in Lubbock, Texas, so. I think that's Comanche country, so. And no junipers over there either. Anyway, so we saved their lives. What's the point?
Obedience.
Everybody was there was nobody that was looking at anything that outside the box. Everybody's looking inside the box, and nobody could find anything. This was a problem that was outside the box. So they needed somebody who could actually see outside the box. Medicine is one of those sciences where people are very focused on one thing, and they want everybody to be average. And of course, this little girl, they had just treated her. It was their fault. I mean, they treated her with a broad-spectrum antibiotic that killed off all of her normal flora. It was their fault. They almost killed that little girl.
They always start with the broad spectrum.
Well, they started with, they didn't know what they're doing this now. See, in the old days, what we used to treat a urinary tract infection with a specific antibiotic. We did a culture plate where we would determine which antibiotic would work on that bacteria. So we identified the bacteria and then we treated it. Of course, that took a couple days, but at least we were treating the individual with the antibiotic that would work. Now they don't do that anymore.
It's backwards now.
Well, it's too expensive, so they don't want to do that sensitivity plate. They're not even culturing urines anymore to find out what it is. Normally, 85% of the time it's going to be E. coli. It's going to be an enteric. It's going to be a fecal bacteria that causes a urinary tract infection. So they just automatically treat you with something. 85% of the time they're going to be right. So they just treat you with that broad spectrum antibiotic. The problem is, of course, we're creating situations where the bacteria is becoming insensitive to. We're creating an insensitivity there that will potentially cause trouble in the future. We already did this with gonorrhea. We had penicillin-resistant gonorrhea. We're treating all gonorrhea with penicillin, and because we were treating it over and over and over and over again, the bacteria, gonorrhea, became insensitive to penicillin, and all of a sudden we didn't have anything to treat gonorrhea. Oops. This happens from time to time, and we need to be aware that all that generic medicine is potentially causing problems. Why am I talking about this? Anyway, I didn't conform, and I got in trouble for it. I actually got in trouble because he didn't order the test that I did. Whoops. Damn, doctor.
Did anybody ever do any studies about outside of the hospital, like, or in the military or other work environments?
We're fairly conforming. I mean, look at, well, we won't talk about the president right now.
Oh,
Nothing's going on these days anyway, I don't think. He's not tweeting so much anymore. He attacked John McCain. The man's been dead for 6 months. Leave him alone. Don't dig him up.
I know. Might as well just slap him around, I guess.
It's because he's the one that forwarded the FISA.
Yeah, but it was days after it already started. It had already started.
McCain pushed it forward.
Yeah,
He's dead now.
but there was a reason why he did it.
Politics.
Yeah, well, no, that wasn't the reason. His politics were the same as, theoretically, the same as Trump's.
It's not good for politics so early in the morning.
No. Not this early in the morning? Okay, we'll try to relax then. When looking at evidence, a group is more likely to listen to several small groups than one large one, and of course, in this case, everybody had expended all their ideas. They were ready to let the girl die. They were ready to do it. He hadn't ordered anything else. And I got pissed because it didn't make any, I wasn't working in micro, so I hadn't done anything with this little kid. I'd only been in there once. So I went back into micro to try to figure out what was wrong with her. I knew she was dying. The nurses told us that she was. The doctor said, I don't know what else to do for her. So I went into the lab and I did my own test. And I just happened to find what was going on. Otherwise, she would have died. If I was one of those people that stays in the box, she would have died because I wouldn't have looked for her. And who looks for Candida albicans anyway? You can't find it in any of the literature. You can now, of course, because of her. But in those days, this is the first case we'd ever seen of this because that was a brand new antibiotic that killed off all of the bacteria in her stool. And one of the problems with the pharmaceutical companies is when they look at this stuff, they don't say anything negative about their drug. This is the most wonderful drug that ever existed. When Prozac first came out, they said it was 90% effective. It's down to 66% effective now. But they said it was 90% effective. Well, their research said it was 90% effective. It's not. Maybe it's close. Well, it's approaching 50% at this point. Really kind of strange. Unanimity, as Ash discovered with his work, it is very difficult to be the lone dissenter in a group. It's difficult. Unless you're used to it, which I was. I've always been different. And I was, I was the one kid that wouldn't go to Bible school. There were two of us actually that didn't go. But the other guy joined me. I was the one that didn't go. That's tough. That's tough. I mean, you're in a Methodist town and you're the only one not going to Bible school. Try it sometime. Try to be the only kid that is the lone dissenter. My brothers and sisters went, and they had the same religious leanings that I did. But they went because they wanted to conform. My little brother still complains that I caused a lot of trouble. People didn't like him because of me, and it was my fault that they didn't like him because I didn't go to Bible school.
Was there a reason? I mean, just,
I'm an atheist.
and you've known that ever since you were little?
Oh,
that
yeah.
You were an atheist?
Yeah. How do you learn about religion?
I was asking too many questions one time when I was little, and you know those Mormons that go door to door? They came by one time, and apparently my mom and my dad let them in, and they sat me down with them, and I asked them a lot of questions.
Oh, you're a troublemaker.
I just wanted to know, like, I was wondering, like, what's this person? And I don't know, I was just...
Who's Moroni?
Then I got so confused when I was little because I used to go to Native American church,
Yeah.
and a lot of people brought up God, and I'm like, wait, I thought God and Creator were two different people, or like. See, this is why I get confused. They should probably explain this to me when I was like little. But
Just give the guy a single name. Stop calling him different things.
so now I'm like, everybody.
Call
just,
him George, okay?
I don't know. Everybody,
We're talking about George here, okay?
Everybody was just talking crap about each other. Every religion does that. So now I'm just like, I don't want to do that anymore.
It gets very confusing. How did I know?
You just-
I wasn't forced to go to church. So, I mean, isn't that where they teach you?
I don't know, it's just interesting, that's.
I mean, it's a mature decision. There are some religions that don't allow you you can't become a member of their church until you turn 18. Anabaptists are that way. That's why they call them Anabaptists. You know, the Moravians, the Amish, the Hutterites, the Mennonites. You know these guys? You never run into them. Mennonites. You have Mennonites around here. You don't have Hutterites and Amish. I grew up around the Amish and Quakers. Oh my God. They're always right. You can't argue anything with those guys. They're always correct and you're always wrong, which is fun. Anyway, it's tough to be a lone dissenter. It's easy to conform and go along with everybody else. And of course, everybody, like I said, everybody's got on black today, with blue jeans on. How strange! Everybody's in black. Well, blue, dark blue. I'm in dark blue.
On Mondays, we wear black.
Is yours? Is that?
It's reflecting Monday attitude.
That's how we feel internally.
If there is one other dissenter in the group, it is much easier for the second person to also dissent. Once upon a time, this is in my last institution, it was a Catholic college that became non-Catholic. It was bought out by another group. It was still a Catholic college. There were crosses all over the place. There were naves where they had, statues of saints and whatnot. And the nuns were still there. As bizarre as that sounds, even though the nuns didn't own the college anymore, they were still there. Well, my colleague decided that we were going to have the great debate. Does God exist? And of course, guess who we picked for the dissenter? And he couldn't find anybody else to debate. So it was me against these other 5 brilliant college professors. I know, how in the world could I possibly win that debate? But I did. I won the debate with the nuns sitting right there. I love those nuns. They were just great. They were wonderful people. And I wasn't trying to tell them not to believe in God. That's not what my point was. My point was, I don't need a God. That was my point. And afterwards, there were students that came up and said, nobody's ever said that before. We've never been allowed not to believe in God. I didn't really convert anybody to my way of thinking. I just gave them the right to think in a different way. That's all that happened. And there were a bunch of kids that came up and said that. I mean, most of the kids had gone to church all their lives. And some of them were still questioning. Of course, they were in their 18, 19, 20 year olds. So they were still debating whether what was going to happen next. But it was the first time they'd ever heard an argument in the other direction. They needed a dissenter, and they had never been around one. I mean, if you go to church every Sunday, it's not like there's a guy outside screaming that you don't have to go to church. You get all dressed up in your best clothes so that God sees you in your best light, I guess. I don't know. Haven't figured that one out yet.
I've only met, I think, a handful of other atheists. I was in Iraq with one.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It'd be interesting now that you bring it up. I want to get in touch with him and ask him. He still holds the same views, or have they changed over the years? But
Oh, geez. I was over in Vietnam, and it seemed like when people were in a really negative situation, They weren't praying, they were swearing. So, I don't know. The old statement is that there are no atheists in foxholes, but the reality is, I heard an awful lot of people saying a lot more swearing, doing a lot more swearing than praying, especially when they were wounded. You know, those guys are swearing up a storm, and that's okay. You know, you gotta reduce your stress by swearing, and that works, and that's okay. Experiments show that two dissenters will actually feel very close and warm to each other. Jesus sent out disciples in pairs. This is according to Mark 1:21 through 28. If you've read the Bible and read Mark, then you know what I'm talking about. Church of Latter-day Saints always sends out their missionaries in pairs. Sometimes these guys don't like each other, which is a little weird. That gets a little strange. They're supposed to hang together all the time. Having someone else dissent gives a second dissenter courage to dissent on subsequent examples. As I said, I was the only one, I was the first one in the school not to go to Bible school. And this was in September. I started in September. I said I wasn't going to go. My mother wrote me a note, said that if he doesn't want to go, he doesn't have to go. Thanks, Mom. By October, there was another guy that had decided he didn't want to go to Bible school either. But there was only the two of us. We were the only two. And we weren't allowed to say anything. We weren't allowed to talk, so while they were in Bible school, we had to sit there and do homework or read. I read. Anyway, the other guy couldn't read. He was in the 5th grade. Group cohesion, when someone from outside the group dissents, it is more powerful than when someone inside the group dissents. This may be because we see people in the same group easily following one another. This is known as cohesion or knee-jerk reaction. But outside the group, the likelihood of dissent is less strong. In an opposing group, the pressure is to be cohesive. Dissent from the group has much more power against us. And of course, that has to do with group cohesion. In Australia, they did some really interesting studies. One was a survey where there was a Confederate that said that he wasn't going to do the survey. He thought there was something wrong with the questions, and then other people would follow him if he dissented. The other had to do with jaywalking. They had an individual that was jaywalking to see if other people would follow. Try this sometime. Try walking against the light and see if you can get other people to follow you. It's really kind of fascinating, as long as you don't get somebody hit by a car. Anyway, they were jaywalking, which is of course against the law in Australia. When they jaywalked with an individual that, wearing really nice clothes, lots of people followed them. They all wanted to be like that person wearing nice clothes. When it was somebody wearing really bad clothes, an individual that was poorly dressed, they were less likely to jaywalk. In other words, they didn't want to be associated with somebody in bad clothes. As funny as that is. So we are obedient sometimes and sometimes we're not. Researchers were interested to find out if subjects were as group-oriented in a private response as when the response is public. Research shows that when response is public, people feel much more pressure to conform than if they are allowed to express their opinions in a secret ballot. It's a lot easier to not conform in a secret ballot, to dissent. It is easier to express your opinion in private rather than allowing yourself to be held up to public ridicule. Prior commitment, anyone who has ever participated in a sporting event where there are judges, umpires, or referees knows that once an official makes a decision on a play, they very rarely will change their mind, even if they're obviously wrong. And this happened in a baseball game. One umpire, the guy he was pitching a perfect game. It was the last out in the 9th inning. It was a bunt in between the pitcher and the first baseman. The pitcher fielded the ball and threw the ball to the first baseman. The umpire called him safe, even though the guy hadn't touched the base yet. And it was obvious to everybody in the stands. The other umpires, of course, he was blocking, the pitcher was blocking the view from any other umpire. So that umpire got the call, and he was obviously wrong. And they replayed it on television over and over and over again. This is before they could review their calls. And he wouldn't, and it was obvious that he was wrong. And he was all wrong by a lot, but he would not change his call. It was the last out. They won the game like 9-0. I mean, it wasn't like this hit was going to change anything. Anyway, and it was a perfect game. 27 men up, 27 men out. And he wouldn't change his call. The next day he apologized to the pitcher because he saw the replay. He said he saw it differently. Anyway, researchers have discovered that once an individual makes a public decision, they very rarely recant their decision, even under overwhelming social pressure. As this guy, I mean, everybody was screaming, and it was a home crowd. The pitcher was he was a home pitcher. Hence, arguing with an official may only steel their heart against you. In other words, they're going to make more bad calls against you. So it's better just to shut up and not say anything. The best course, of course, is not to hold the official up to social ridicule. People may conform to a group for one of two reasons. Normative influence. Conformity is based on individuals' desire to be accepted and avoid rejection of the group. Going along with the crowd. We want to be just like everybody else. Informational influence. Conformity is based on the individual's acceptance of reality provided by other people. Wanting to be correct and accepting someone else's opinion as more knowledgeable. And of course, this came up this weekend. There's a bill in Congress, has to do with background checks. Background checks. We argue this all the time. The problem is there are some states that don't always give their information to the federal government. The federal government has a background check, and the Congress wants to change. They're trying to close a loophole of individuals who are selling. Are part-time salesmen. They're not licensed gun salesmen. Okay. These are the people they're having problems with because they don't have to do background checks. They can do anything they want. As long as if I decided to sell somebody a pistol, since I never sell pistols, I could just sell it to you. Anybody. I can sell it to anybody. I don't have to do anything. I can just sell you the gun, and it's legal, perfectly legal. In this state it is, anyway. In some states it's theoretically not. But if you go to a gun show, you can buy all the guns you want. And that's what happened with Klebold and Harris. Neither Klebold or Harris were 18 years old, so they couldn't buy a gun, but Klebold's girlfriend went to a gun show in Denver and bought the weapons that they used to shoot up Columbine. Anyway, and it was kind of legal, wasn't illegal. At least it wasn't illegal. So they're trying to pass that law. I guess it's going up before Congress. The whole background check. They're trying to close that loophole for unauthorized individuals to sell guns. We'll see what happens. New Zealand, of course, they banned assault rifles. The guy that shot up the mosques, he killed 49 people. I was using his, I guess 50 now, I guess the 50th person has died. They banned guns like 3 days afterwards. No more assault rifles in Australia. I mean in New Zealand. Why am I talking about this? Oh, informational influence. Wanting to be correct and, of course, accepting other people who are more knowledgeable. It's really kind of fascinating. We'll see what happens. Research shows that some people are more susceptible than others, but that personality tests are poor predictors of conformity. That's not part of your personality, is conforming. The assumption is if you live in a society, then you are conforming to some extent. We've got two people with hats on, two males with hats on, and one male with a headband on. And none of the females are wearing hats. This is kind of interesting. We're being very conformists here. We all have on dark clothes. It's a Monday, so evidently we're wearing black today, except I'm wearing blue. Figured that one out yet. I'll figure it out. I'll figure out why. Yeah, you have to remember, I've lived on reservations for 15 years, and this is something really different for me. I mean, the fact that everybody wears the same colored clothes.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Oh, sure. Up north, they don't wear it. You can go to the Blackfeet Reservation, the Fort Peck, you can go to the Crow, the Gros Ventre, the Chippewa. None of them wear. They don't wear the same clothes. And their regalia is a lot more colorful. Well, anyway, we won't go into regalia. You guys know how long. But there's a reason why you don't, and there's a reason why they don't. Okay. We'll figure it out.
I always thought of that as nonconformist.
Oh, hell no. My God, look at your clothes. No, you're pretty conforming, I would say. Well, I mean, and your traditionalism is, look at how people adhere to traditionalism. That's one of your strengths, is the fact that people have very similar ideas, or accepting traditionalism. I mean, your taboos, people very rarely break their taboos. But on another reservation, if you're 18 years old, you would break the taboo just to show that you were different or unique or whatever. We're going to talk about uniqueness in just a second. Researchers discovered that when social influences are weak, then personality is more predictive of behavior, and thus conformity is more common. Situation certainly influences whether the individual will dare to dissent or conform. And I've always been very select. I don't dissent just because. I dissent because I think it's time to do it. Like when I'm arguing with the doctors. Repeating Ash's conformity experiments around the world, researchers have discovered that different cultures have different levels of conformity. Lebanon, Brazil, and Hong Kong, conformity is right at 30%. Bantu tribesmen of Zimbabwe, 51%. Possibly the least conforming population were the very individualistic French. And of course, we're still having problems with people accepting the French. I had some very conservative friends that despise the French for no reason whatsoever. During the Second Gulf War, which is still going on by the way, during the Second Gulf War, when George W. Bush was president of the United States, he couldn't get the French to agree to go into Iraq with him. And because of that, people got really pissed off. They stopped serving French dressing. So if you went into a restaurant, ordered French dressing, you got, oh, I'm sorry, we don't have any of that.
We got American fries.
Well, Freedom fries.
Freedom fries, yeah.
Freedom fries instead of French fries, as weird as that is. French fries, which aren't really French, they're really German. They're called pommes frites in Germany. But they weren't invented by the French at all. They were invented by the Germans, as weird as that sounds. Why they call them French fries, I have no idea. I know, but they changed the name of French fries at the congressional cafeteria to Freedom Fries instead of French fries. They were so pissed off at the French. As stupid as that sounds. My friend hated the French, and he was a historian studying World War II. And he said, look, the French capitulated, and then we had to go over there and free them from the Germans. Again, we did the same thing in World War I. But the reality is, of course, the French were fighting against the Germans just as much as we were. My father-in-law was in Patton's 3rd Division and 3rd Army. Yeah, I think he was 3rd Army. Anyway, Patton's artillery were all French. They were French artillery. And of course, Patton's, he's sprinting across Europe, and the artillery had to keep up with him. And anytime he was in combat, they were there. They were right there behind him, sprinting across Germany with all, tagging along with all those howitzers and whatnot, heavy artillery, and they kept up with it. And nobody complained, not the French did. As many parents have discovered, challenging a child's behavior can sometimes lead to the child acting in the opposite manner to exert their freedom and individuality. Of course, this is child psychology. This is known as reactance, acting to protect your sense of freedom. It's known as reactance, and we do this from time to time. Parents can limit this type of reaction from their children by offering them choices instead of commands. And a lot of times that's what you need to do. Instead of giving them one option, give them 2 or 3 options. I know, this is really kind of interesting. My grandson is 6, and my daughter has, well, of course, I'm her dad, so she's used to be dealing with psychology. She's been doing this his entire life. Really kind of interesting.
That makes sense, though, because you want your child to think for themselves.
Exactly. They need to think. They need to make decisions. A child that doesn't make decisions won't make decisions when they need to. This kid makes all kinds of interesting decisions. He's forced to make all these decisions. Researchers in Canada have found that it may be the laws against underage drinking that lead to as much underage drinking as there is. A survey in 1997 found that a whopping 69% of 21 to 24-year-olds had been drunk at least once the year before. 77% of those 18 to 20 had been drunk the year before. And of course, the drinking age at that time in 1997 was 21. But you had more underage drinkers than you had legal drinkers. So they did it on the U.S. college campuses. What they found out, 75% drinking rate of those of age, individuals that were legal, 81% drinking rate for those under the age of 21 who were drinking illegally. Now my question comes, it has to do with marijuana. They say, well, we'll just make it a law that you have to be 21 to smoke marijuana. Will that work? What's the probability that somebody that's 15 and cool isn't going to smoke pot if they get a hold of it? Just because it's illegal. Like they're looking around to see if the cops are around before they start smoking. You can make all the laws you want. Whoops, there we go. You know, I've had this picture up for about 4 or 5 years. I just noticed that he doesn't have any shoes on either of his feet. There's one shoe right there, but I have no idea where his other shoe is. But he's really drunk. He's really snockered. Further research into teenage drinking by Ings and Hansen in 1989 showed that while 15% of legal age students are heavy drinkers, 24% of underage students are heavy drinkers. We keep discovering this, that it's the teenage kids that are the ones that are doing the drinking. And we can't control it. Damn it. Just as the preacher's kid is the wildest and the Catholic schoolgirls are reputed to be the most sexually active, rampant alcohol and drug use among teenagers may be a reactance against restrictions. So what's the answer? I know, we could legalize it so that they can drink legally. Will that reduce the amount of drinking? Teenage drinking?
It might take the fun out of it, you know?
If we take the fun out of it, is it good? But that's not what we're trying to do. It's not that we're trying to take the fun out of it. We're trying to stop them from drinking. Is there any way to stop them from drinking? Because then they get in cars and they're really stupid. Well, they're dumb anyway. They're pretty damn stupid anyway. And then they drive and then they kill themselves or kill somebody else. I don't know. Anyway, there we go. Party boys of some fraternity. Of course, this is an old picture. You can tell by the length of their hair. White people acting stupid. While people are pressured to conform by their dominant group, they also seek uniqueness. This is especially after they reach puberty, or after they've gone through puberty. People go to great ends to declare their uniqueness, from hairstyles to body piercing and body art. And of course, this is the oddity of the room. Everybody is wearing black. Everybody is conforming. Right? Everybody has on dark clothes.
Yes.
Do you own any clothes that are like bright? Would anybody wear my yellow coat? If you see a yellow coat on campus, you know who the hell it is, because nobody else would wear a yellow coat. So somebody wearing a green coat this morning, but it was a dark green coat, of course.
People haven't, I guess you could say, conforming to spring season yet.
I'm sorry, what?
People haven't conforming to spring season yet. Still in the winter phase.
Oh, so in the winter you
I
wear.
agree with that because I made a decision on what I was gonna wear yesterday, because it was dark.
Oh,
Because
okay.
it would stay warm, it would soak up more heat.
That makes sense. It's not warm yet. I ran this weekend and I ran in a red coat.
Because I have white shirts too, I have different color, but.
I can't wait
When it's
till-
cold, I'll wear my dark ones.
Can't wait until Wednesday. It's going to be in the 60s on Wednesday, so maybe we'll see a white shirt. Now you're going to think about it, and of course you're going to wear a white shirt.
Black is more
Well,
slim.
I'm wearing bright clothes.
Not only is black shirts, you'll probably see changes with like pants to short cuts and dresses.
It's not just here. I'll have to admit, it's not just here. One time I was getting on a plane in Moline, Illinois, and I was traveling with my wife, which doesn't get to happen very often. But we were traveling, and we were standing there and looking at all the people waiting to get on the plane. Everybody had on a black coat. Everybody had on except my wife and I, of course. I think I was wearing red, and she was wearing green or something. I don't know. But we were the only two people without a black coat on, and this is people from Iowa, people from Illinois. They're not just Navajos. I don't think they're Navajos up there. They don't seem to be Navajos anyway. Anyway, it just seems kind of odd to me. But it fits in.
I wear black for two other reasons too.
Oh, what's the other two
Because
reasons?
I'm a messy eater, number one. And it hides my fat better. I'm not as fat, I don't look as fat in dark clothes.
Is that right?
That's
Is that
why-
the way it works?
That's why I said black is slimming. That's the only
Black
why
is
I wear it.
slimming. White is fattening?
It's just more obvious.
When asked who they are, people tend to point out their differences from the norm, rather than chronicle their similarities. If we're in the Arab world, that they always mention their similarities, because it is a conforming society, and in that society, you want to be as conforming as possible, despite the fact that you may not be conforming at all. You may be very different, but you always mention your similarities. The same way in India. They always talk about their similarities. When minority of any kind, that aspect seems to stick out like a sore thumb. In Korea, when I was in Korea, it was the fact that I had gray hair. That's what stuck out more than anything else. People gave me things because I looked so old. In Korea, you have to be like 80 years old before your hair turns white. So everybody assumed that I was this old man. I was only in my 50s. I wasn't that old. I was just American. They didn't care that I was an American. It was the fact that I was gray-headed. So people want to be unique.
Can I take a picture of this?
It's. Oh, I got more, and it's going to get better.
I would probably
This,
spray him with my pepper spray. if I saw him. Get away from me.
that's a girl.
That's a
Aw.
girl. Still.
That's a guy.
That's crazy.
It's an old guy. Look at his gray beard. There you go. Some people need to be unique.
I've seen that.
She's a lawyer in London. She's a lawyer. Now she could take the spiked necklace off. These spikes come out of her hair. She doesn't have to wear the bustier. But she's still painted like crazy, and she's still got these lumps on her head.
I seen it.
Well, the tattoos are okay. They look cool or nice, but the rest would be
The modification.
The modification.
I used to see this guy in LA, he's morphing into a cat.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Did
All
you see
that-
the one with the lizard where he like splits his tongue in half and everything?
Well, she's got a split tongue. She just isn't sticking it out. Her tongue's split.
I should show these pictures to my mom. My mom hates that I got my nose pierced. I'm gonna be like, this is, it could be worse.
Much better than this, okay.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
Everybody has to be unique. I don't know why you do that to your nose, but hey. I have a nephew that did this to his ears.
Wasn't that like a trend before? People just kept.
Yeah, getting
Doing
bigger
that?
and bigger,
Oh,
loops,
well.
yeah.
The new one's putting holes in your cartilage.
You can probably breathe better.
Faster and harder.
You can probably breathe really good. Oh my god.
Now, those aren't real teeth, obviously. I mean, those are prosthetics, but the rest of it is, I don't know if I tattooed my face, but hey, shave your head, put lumps in your, look like somebody's been hitting you. All those unique pictures, everybody wants to be unique, as exciting as that is.
So where does abnormal psychology play into all that?
Oh, we'll let them be them. We'll let them be unique. I would say it's not abnormal at all. I mean, it's accepted behavior. If it were 30 years ago, when nobody was doing any of this stuff, when people weren't tattooing their entire body, at freak shows, they used to have the painted lady who was tattooed all over her body, and of course that was a freak show. Now, I have a nephew that is painted, except for his face, from his neck all the way, and of course I haven't seen his nether regions, but all the parts that I've seen, he's got tattoos. He had a huge fish on his back. I'm not sure what he's done with that one. I haven't seen him lately. He just got married, so I'm not exactly sure. I don't know. I have no idea. But he's the one that did the whole ear thing. Why would you do that?
I think it's just adaptation.
Adapting?
Yeah.
Adapting to what society wants you to look like?
Because a lot of these piercings and tattoos, they actually have a history coming from certain parts of the world.
Yeah.
Cultures, and that's
We can,
adapted.
yeah, you can rationalize just about everything. I mean, for the longest time, however, despite the fact this is historical, people weren't doing that. Not even there were they doing it. The whole Hawaiian tattoos that people are getting on their arms, the Chinese words that they're having put on their bodies. I was watching a movie the other day. This lady thought she had peace and harmony, and it actually said soy sauce.
Oh my god.
Which I just found humorous. I don't know. But yeah, you've got a good point. I mean, that is a point. So now we're going back to the traditionalism that we had before. The tattoos are this symbol or that symbol. It represents something else. Potentially, you're right. But like I said, for a number of years, maybe even for centuries, that whole tattoo thing was, people weren't doing it. But now all of a sudden they're going back. I mean, the whole Celtic circle thing, the Celts. I mean, they haven't done anything with those Celtic circles for hundreds of years. Now all of a sudden, if you're Irish or Scottish, then you're getting these Celtic circles put tattoos on your body. I don't know. Is it still conforming? And the answer is probably, yeah. Other people are doing it, so we're doing it too. You know, the whole tattoo things, the whole piercing thing, you know, you got to ask yourself, is this unique? Am I being unique, or am I just following the crowd? But people usually don't ask themselves that question. They just do it. So,
I got in trouble when I got a tattoo. I was a man already too. I got in trouble.
So why is it, did you get it in the wrong place?
No, I got right here I get a Marine Corps tattoo.
Oh my God, not a Marine Corps tattoo. Then you joined the Army.
I got it after I got out.
Oh, left, you got it, okay.
Oh no.
I had a brother-in-law that was Army and Navy. Yeah, he got in trouble for having Army tattoos when he was in the Navy.
But when the guy that was giving me the tattoo, he was a former Marine veteran, and he was almost done. As he was finishing up cleaning it, he asked me, "So what unit were you in?" You know, we started talking about the Marine Corps. And I was joking with him. I told him, I said, "No, I wasn't in the Marines." I said, I just wanted to get this, tell people I was in the Marines. He got this pissed off.
Oh, I guess so.
I was like, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Those guys are serious.
And he
Well,
was
you
like,
were
he
one of
was
those
like,
guys.
man, he's
Yeah,
like,
seriously.
I almost put a line across it.
Okay, I'll see you guys. Oh, wait a minute. We can go ahead and turn this off.